Good day, everybody. Welcome, and thank you very much for joining. I'm so excited that we can start on time because we know that this is a very important discussion. And just checking if, I know Dawie is here, but just a quick sound check before I do the introduction. Dawie, can you hear me?
Good morning to you. I can hear you indeed. I just want to check, can you hear me fine? Can you see me fine?
I can hear you perfectly well, Dawie. Thank you very much, and thanks for doing this for us. So a lot has happened in South Africa, hasn't it? We look at not just COVID, but even before COVID, we were having a very sluggish economy, then COVID hit, and now we are seeing recent spurts of violence. So we're looking forward to your commentary on that, Dawie Roodt. I can't see you on camera anymore, but I'm sure, yes, there you are. So I want to have a discussion, right? And looking forward to your talk. What does this all mean for South Africa? We have seen some progress. State Capture Commission is progressing. Later on in the year, I'm told that they will wrap up and they will present their recommendation. And we have seen the incarceration of the former president, Jacob Zuma. Is this a good thing for South Africa, or is it just brand management? I'm looking forward to your talk, Dawie. I can't wait. But just by way of introduction, Dawie and I go way long. If you think about it, Dawie, for 6-7 years, we have been speaking at our events, and we always enjoy your commentary, man. So who are you? Just tell the audience, who is Dawie Roodt?
Thank you very much, Marius. It's very nice talking to you again. Yeah, we go back a couple of years, and it's always nice for me to share a platform with you like this. My name is Dawie Roodt. I'm the chief economist at the financial services company called the Efficient Group. So I'm the director. I'm a founding member of the Efficient Group, and we are a financial services company providing all sorts of financial services. So I do the economic research, and I'm a director, of course, but I'm also responsible for one of our subsidiaries with the name of Efficient Private Clients. And Efficient Private Clients essentially look after the money locally and internationally of wealthy people like you, see. So, so we look after the money of rich people, essentially. But I do extensive research on economics. I've got a team that assists me with that. The reason why we do that is because my job also entails assisting our asset managers in the allocation of resources of the various portfolios. So I've got a team assisting me with economic research. And then in the recent years, I've been getting more and more involved in political analysis, which I also find very, very interesting. In fact, economics and politics is pretty much the same thing. It's the same, it's only two different sides of the same coin. And I've been doing some economic analysis recently, but I've got a very strong economics team behind me.
That's good, Dawie, and we all know that. We enjoy your analytics and making sense. You know, the thing about economics is we see these things, but we don't quite think about the impact, the ramifications of the decisions that are being made, you know, to the economy, to the ordinary person on the ground. And so that's why I appreciate this. But just for the benefit of everybody here, we put this flash talk, as we call it. It's going to be a new series that we are launching, a smart procurement, and it's going to come very unplanned as big news break. And this is the first of its kind, and it's a pleasure to be with Dawie Roodt. So Dawie Roodt is going to effectively just talk through the current situation in South Africa for the next 30-40 minutes. And then he's going to also take some question and answer. So please, you make use of that chat button, send us the question, and then we can have a discussion with Dawie afterwards. And Dawie, once again, thank you very much for your time. So over to you now. Please make sense of what is happening in South Africa at the moment.
Thank you again. All right, well, you know, and that's the difficult part. The job of an economist is that people quite often think that the job of an economist is to make predictions about things. The reality is the economists also do not know what's going to happen in the future. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. And in the case of being an economist in South Africa, it's difficult enough to try and figuring out what's going on now. So maybe the best way to try to predict the future is to understand what is going on now, to see where we come from, and that will hopefully give us a bit of an idea what can we expect in the future. Now, before I get to South Africa, I just need to sketch the international environment, which is very important to us. And it is important to us because South Africa is a small open economy. Small open economy means that we do a lot of business internationally, and whatever happens internationally affects the South African economy directly. And I'm going to give you many examples. A very simple example is simply what happens to the exchange rate of the rand. The rand is the exchange rate of the rand is pretty much a reflection of flows, capital flows in and out of South Africa. But the exchange rate of the rand can also be seen as a barometer of international confidence in the world. Quite often you see there's some sort of crisis somewhere else in the world and the rand comes under pressure because the rand, being a very highly traded currency, can be seen to an extent as a barometer of international confidence. Anyway, so let's see if we can understand what's been going on internationally, and that's how that's going to affect the South African economy. Now, politically, we've had a couple of changes in the recent years internationally. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because of time constraints. But I think there are signs that the world, politically, that the world is becoming more, let's call it nationalistic. I think Trump is a good example, Bolsonaro's, Modi, Putin. There are many examples of nationalist governments internationally. Of course, now Trump is gone. It's Biden now there, but the trend seems to be to the right in terms of politics. Brexit is another good example. Which will have all sort of implications on things like, for example, international trade and globalization and things like that, but not too much time on that. Economically, there are two things that is standing out for me. The one is that central banks internationally are exceptionally accommodative in their monetary policy approach. Examples of that is that internationally interest rates are the lowest they've been, in fact, in the history of mankind in many instances. Short-term interest rates are at zero or below zero in many instances. So interest rates are internationally are very low, and central banks are also going out of their way with all sort of other experiments, like, for example, quantitative easing, where they print money out of nothing and use that to buy financial instruments, forcing the yield curve lower, for instance, or things like, for example, so-called yield curve control and so on. So the point is international central banks are basically pumping in trillions of dollars into the financial markets, and the financial markets love this. The financial markets are reacting very positive to this stimulation, and we've seen financial markets doing very well for many years, for 10 years or so. So this quantitative easing and other monetary policy approaches it's been going on for the past 10 years, and we've seen more of that the past year or so because of the lockdown internationally. So that is on the one hand. The question, of course, is, are we going to see inflation because of that? And that's a debate amongst the economists. Are we going to see international inflation, or is this only transitionary? My view is inflation is only here for a short term, and the little bit of inflationary pressures that we're seeing currently is here only for a couple of months or so, and in a year's time, inflation is going to be lower internationally. And I do not think we're going to see monetary policy tightening soon. The second thing, as far as economics is concerned internationally, is that fiscal policy internationally is also exceptionally accommodative. And with fiscal policy, I mean what governments essentially are doing. Governments are spending money like there's no tomorrow, with all sort of packages and measures that are being put in place to support the economies. Biden, for instance, is spending huge amounts of money. I mean, the amounts of money that the US administration is spending the past year is more than what they've spent in the war effort during the Second World War in relative terms. The people do not appreciate this huge stimulation coming from the fiscal accounts. Not only in America, all over the place, the Europeans and the Chinese and so on. The result of that, of course, is increasing debt levels of governments internationally, which is for now not a problem because of monetary policy that is so very accommodative. And that is another outstanding question. Economists are not sure what's going to happen with all this debt. Can a country have too much debt? The debt levels of the Japanese is in excess of 250% at the moment. Compare that to South Africa's just below 100%, and the Americans just 120% or so. But can you have too much debt? And if so, how much is too much? And the answer to that is we just don't know. We thought that 60% debt to GDP ratio is getting on the high side. The American debt level is currently is double that. In the short term, it's got a very good and a positive spin to it, and that is that because of all this stimulation, financial markets are doing well, but there are a lot of signs that the global economy is really on the rebound, doing very well, growing quite strongly. There are recent signs that the world economy is slowing down a little bit, but standing back a little bit, all this stimulation seems to have the required impact on the world economy. We see strong economic growth all over the place. Just keep in mind, last year was a horrible year. And simply because last year was a horrible year, this year is going to will look well anyway. Doesn't matter what you do. But with the additional stimulation, the world economy seems to be doing quite well. And for South Africa, that is good because much of this money is spilling over into South Africa, supporting our financial markets and our local economy. But there's another channel through which this is good for South Africa, and that is simply that all this stimulation and all this economic growth happening internationally is good for commodity prices. And South Africa is a primarily commodity exporting country. So we're exporting all these commodities, which is a huge opportunity for South Africa, an opportunity of which the window is going to close soon. And we're certainly not capitalizing as much as we could on this opportunity because it's just too difficult to start a business in South Africa. It's too difficult to start a mine. In some instances, look, for example, what happened in Richards Bay with Rio Tinto. They stopped their activities there because it's just not possible to do business. It's just too dangerous. In the meantime, commodity prices are very strong, and some of South Africa's commodity exporters are doing absolutely amazing. And that results then in the surplus on our current account. Currently, we have a surplus on our current account, the difference between imports and exports, equal to approximately 5% of the economy. And all this capital, all this money flowing in is good for the currency. And that's part of the reason why we saw the Rand doing quite well the last couple of months or so. Recently, the past couple of days, the Rand has been under pressure, obviously, because of the last 10 days. But before that, Rand is actually relatively strong because of very strong, nice inflows because of the current account. But we could have done so much more better because of this commodity cycle in which where the world finds itself now. So that's the world economy, an economy that is really running on cheap money, an economy that is running on huge fiscal stimulation and monetary stimulation internationally. How long that's going to last, nobody knows, but for now, happy times are back again. Unfortunately, we can't really participate in this international party because of many local obstacles. And the most important local obstacle is probably the ANC government. And maybe just one or two comments about government in South Africa. The ANC coalition government has been a hugely destructive force that has done immense damage to the South African economy at various levels. And I can go through many examples. The local authorities are a mess. The Auditor General report just indicated that the majority of our local authorities are just financially unsustainable. Most of them are ANC government local authorities. The state-owned enterprises, just about all of them have been run into the ground operationally and financially. Eskom is only the best known example, but there are many other ones. They're all bankrupt, mismanaged, or most of them, and they owe a lot of money. Another example is the national departments. Our education in South Africa is a mess. The quality of our education is not only bad, it's the worst in the world in many instances. The same goes for health services. We just saw what happened last year in health services. And the list goes on and the list goes on. So we have the South African, the thing that we call the state have been massively mismanaged the last couple of years, in fact, many years. And today we've reached the end of the line. The reason why that has happened is because of the nature of the ANC government. The nature of the ANC government, we can call it a left-leaning government, but more importantly, in essence, the ANC government is one massive patronage. They give you all ideological answers and reasons why they do A, B, and C. But basically what happens is that the ANC and many of the leadership of the ANC simply uses rhetoric, ideological rhetorics. They use words to sell the ANC to the voters, but basically what they're interested in is for the ANC, this huge, massive patronage to live off the state. That is really what it comes down to. I know many analysts have got a much more ideologically conclusion, or it's much more ideologically driven, their conclusion, saying things like it's a national democratic revolution and all that. I think we give the ANC far too much credit. This is not really ideologically driven, what we've seen. It is just one giant network that lives off the state. And we've reached the end of the line now. The state-owned enterprises, they owe too much money. We cannot keep on bailing them out, the local authorities and all of that. And the state finances itself has become totally unsustainable. The state debt levels have become completely and totally unsustainable, and we cannot go on like this anymore. Recently, the last year or two, three, there were some improvements as far as politics is concerned. Like, for example, Zuma's not there anymore and he's in jail. Ace Magashule has been kicked out, or is in the process of getting kicked out. Nobody really knows. And Ace, a couple of other examples like that. But I must say, I don't give the president all the credit for that. And the reason why I don't give the president all the credit for that is because Zuma ended up in jail, not because of the president, but because some of our institutions still work well in South Africa. In this instance, it was the judiciary. It was the judiciary forcing the police, and the police was very reluctant to arrest Zuma. Zuma, in fact, was in breach of a court order because he did not hand himself in before the Sunday evening. He waited for the police to come and pick him up. And even Cele wasn't too happy to go and pick up Zuma. He was basically forced to do that. If he didn't do that, he would have been in contempt of court as well. So the politicians can take no credit for this. It was the institution, in this instance, the judiciary. Even Zondo, the Zondo Commission itself, thanks to the judiciary, but also thanks to the free press in South Africa, putting so much pressure on Zuma that Zuma had no choice but to appoint the Zondo Commission. And they're doing a sterling job. Another example is that South African Airways was put under business rescue, not because Pravin Gordhan wanted to put South African Airways under business rescue. South African Airways was put under business rescue because a trade union basically forced Pravin Gordhan to do that. So that's the problem with our government, is that they do, sometimes it appears they take sometimes the credit for doing the right things, but it's not them doing the right things. They're simply being forced to do the only thing that is left, and that is to do the right thing. So I'm not too happy with the quality of our political leadership. Our president seems to be a weak president. He's a weak president in terms of his personality. He only takes a decision if he's really forced to take that decision. And he's also a weak president in terms of his support within the ANC, which certainly improved recently. But the jury is still outstanding on whether he will be in a position to really implement politically unpopular decisions, whether he will be allowed to shuffle his cabinet and get rid of a lot of incompetent ministers in his cabinet. So that's part of the problem, I believe, and that is that we have a hugely incompetent government in South Africa, and the numbers are there for all to see. The past 10 days, what we see in the past 10 days is that the ANC government has been humiliated in public. The ANC government has been humiliated for everybody to see. I myself, I've been warning about the increase in social tension. I'll get back to that a little bit later. And it was, everybody could see that there was an increase in social economic tension in South Africa. There were many instances the past 10 days where the press were far better informed about riots and flashpoints in South Africa than the security forces themselves. There are even examples where there are many, you all know about this, where the local communities set up roadblocks to protect their own property. Maybe I can just make a bit of a political, philosophical comment here. Remember, the essence of a government, or the essence of a government or of a country, is that a government basically monopolizes violence. A government has the right to send somebody to jail, based on certain rules, of course. But a government has the right, if you don't want to pay your taxes, then you're going to end up in jail, as an example. Nobody else can do that. A government monopolizes, and that's the essence of a government, that they monopolize violence. If a government cannot monopolize violence, if a government cannot assure, put it differently, if the government cannot assure the safety of the people and of the property of the people, then it loses legitimacy to a large extent. And what we've seen the past 10 days is that the government wasn't there to use violence to protect us. The public had to use violence to protect themselves, and there are many examples of that. And that actually will ask the question on whether government is really in a position to monopolize violence, because they certainly haven't monopolized violence. A bit of a philosophical question. So clearly what we've seen is a government, in many instances, I'm sure you've heard of cases where the security forces actually asked the private sector to provide them with ammunition, as an example, where the president himself actually praised militias, local militias, for protecting their own property, for instance. That's a government that is failing. It's a sign of a failed state. We're not there. It's not a failed state, but those are certainly signs of a failed state. Why did all of this happen? I think all of this happened because of the macroeconomic conditions in South Africa. And I'll get to that just a little bit later. The macroeconomic conditions in South Africa is where we have very high levels of unemployment and poverty. We all know that. Unfortunately, things deteriorated quite a lot recently, and things are probably going to get worse over the next couple of years in South Africa. So that led to an increase in social economic instability in South Africa. With that there was some political variables mixed into this whole thing. And in this instance, this trigger probably was the Zuma. So I think that was the trigger that set the whole thing alight. But then the environment took over. And the environment is an environment of people being very poor, people being desperate. And then that led to thuggery, and I don't think there was much politics behind that necessarily. But soon afterwards, I believe that many political actors saw this as an opportunity to achieve certain political objectives. And I believe, and apparently there are a couple of people that are being sought after, a couple of people that the police are looking for that incited violence, and I think many of them were actually political actors. So it started off with politics in an environment of poverty and high levels of unemployment, and then it ended up with sort of a political element to that as well. I think it's going to calm down. It seems to me as if the security forces got things under control to a large extent, and I think we're probably going to see a bit of a calm returning. And again, I think the president has solidified his own position in the ANC a little bit more. And many of the, let's call it the Zuma faction or the RET faction, doesn't matter what you want to call them, they have been isolated to an extent, which is a good thing. Whether the president will be in a position to take this further, do the right things, I'm not so sure, because this is an opportunity where you can get rid of the bad apples, but you can also get rid of the bad ideas of the bad apples. One example, obvious example, is trying to disarm the public, changing legislation as far as arms are concerned. That's not going to happen. People are simply not going to hand in their arms. There's no way. Clearly, the state can't look after you. Nobody's going to hand in the pistols and the rifles, because I'm going to look after myself. The state proved itself to be incompetent and incapable of looking after me. Before I get to what the economy is going to look like now after this, maybe I can just give a bit of context on where we come from. Remember, the South African economy has been mismanaged for many years. I've mentioned the local authorities, state-owned enterprises, all of those have been run into the ground financially and operationally. On a per capita basis, we've been getting poorer and poorer for many, many years because of the mismanagement of the South African economy. And today we have, let me give you one example, and that's part of the reason why I say we saw this increase in social political tension. We have, for example, 21 million people receiving an income from the state every month. There are 19 million grant recipients in South Africa, and there are 2 million civil servants in South Africa. And of course, there are many other more people, but those are people directly receiving a salary from the state for all practical purposes. Now, in the meantime, the state finances have reached a level where it's become completely and totally unsustainable. The state debt levels are in excess of 80%, well in excess of 80% to GDP at the moment. And what we're going to see now is that the economy will slow down, state revenue will come under pressure again, and there will be more calls on government to support the economy in one way or the other, which we simply cannot afford. The money is just not there. In fact, it is inevitable that we're going to spend less money. The state will spend less money because the state can fund the money, they can spend more money, but only if they cut back on other kinds of spending. And we've cut back as far as we possibly can, or we can increase taxes, which is not a possibility because we're overtaxed already. We can borrow more money, and that's indeed what they're going to do. And the possibility of prescribed assets, I think, is back on the table again for pension funds. So the state finances are just not there to support the economy anymore. And it's become inevitable that 21 million people that receive their income from the state, they will be getting less money over the next couple of years in real terms. And that's what I predicted a year or so ago, is that if you spend less money on 21 million people, that's a guarantee. 21 million people will get angry at you. And that will contribute to the social tension that we just saw in South Africa. And that will continue. So I think we're going to see more of the social tension in South Africa. I think we're going to see these sort of flare-ups over the next couple of years. And really depending on how the political leadership is going to manage this thing, whether it's going to get worse or whether it's going to get better. The kind of decisions that the president must take is, first of all, political. He must get rid of the bad guys, and there are plenty of them. I think he's got some capital to do that. And then he must implement the right kind of policies. And again, I'm a little bit skeptical on whether those right kind of policies will be implemented. It's not all bad news for us. Maybe just getting back to how long the economy is going to take to recover. Remember, economic growth, the way that we calculate economic growth is that we add all the value add in the economy together in one specific period and compare it to a previous period. Now, let me give you one example. And economic data is always flawed. It's just about always flawed. Now, let me give you one example of how GDP numbers or gross domestic product, how that specific number is flawed. If the neighbor's boy breaks my window and I replace the window, that's part of economic growth. But the fact that the window was broken in the first instance is not subtracted from economic growth. And that's what's going to happen. So we're going to see a lot of rebuilding happening in South Africa, which will add to economic activity. But the fact that it was burned down in the first instance will not be subtracted from that. So the big numbers, like, for example, GDP numbers, may look good in the short term. Other numbers, like, for example, unemployment is likely to keep on going up. Poverty will keep on going up, that sort of stuff. So we will see that certainly happening. But the big number, like, for instance, the GDP growth, I think, will not be that much effective. Over the medium, longer term, that, of course, is a completely different story. The biggest damage to South Africa is not burning down the factories and the warehouses. The biggest damage to South Africa is burning down South Africa's image. South Africa's image has been tainted. I've been talking to international journalists and investors, and the damage is horrible. And I'm afraid people are going to ask the question, why should they invest in a country where people burn stuff down? We don't have a government to look after us. The security force is just not there. And the damage to us is really going to be huge for many years. And on top of all of that, we don't have enough electricity. We have crumbling infrastructure as it is in any event. So I'm afraid economic growth is going to be, at best, I'm afraid to say that I don't think we're going to see economic growth of 2% or more for many, many years to come. Sustainably, that is. This year, we're probably going to see economic growth of 4% or 4.5% or so, but a large part of that has to do with the fact that last year was a very bad year. A couple of good parts of South Africa. I did mention the institutions earlier. The institutions are there. Not all of them. Many of the institutions have been really undermined. The public protector is a good one. That happened fairly recently, but the judiciary is still there, doing a good job. I'm talking about the senior guys, the senior courts. The lower courts are not very well managed, but the senior courts are doing quite well. And the rule of law is still, even government, not always, but even government respects the rule of the courts. That is certainly there. judiciary is still there. The South African Reserve Bank is doing a sterling job. Lesetja Kganyago is under very extremely difficult circumstances managing fiscal and monetary policy correctly. I don't think he's going to change monetary policy this week. There's another monetary policy committee meeting. I think it's going to leave the repo rate unchanged. And I'm not so sure we're going to see an increase in interest rates soon, depending what happens internationally, of course. That's also important variable. So interest rates, even if there's an increase in interest rates, it will still remain very accommodative for a long period of time. The exchange rate of the currency, and thanks to Lesetja Kganyago, who's doing an excellent job under difficult circumstances. The exchange rate of the currency, the rand is an undervalued currency. We saw the rand take a bit of a knock the last couple of days, where the currency is currently at about 14.5, was more or less on its average historical trend. So it is more or less where it's supposed to be, even despite the rise. It's not significantly weaker than usual. There are many reasons why the rand is holding up surprisingly well. One has to do with our financial markets. Our financial markets are very, very liquid, very well managed, and very well much integrated with the rest of the world. Additionally, the returns on our financial markets are very good. For example, if you lend money to the South African government, you can get a yield of about 10% for 10 years. There's a reason for that, and that is because of the perceived and actual risk of investing in South Africa. But yields of 10% is very good. In the case of, if you want to lend money to the German government, you have to pay them before they take your money. Interest rates are negative. So the equities in South Africa are very, very well priced, very, very cheap. And our companies, our big companies, are very well managed in South Africa. Unfortunately, we've got the other issues, like I've mentioned, labor legislation, labor relations, and many other policies, and the simple mismanagement of the state by the ANC government. That is the most important obstacle to South Africa and to the South African economy. Mercy, I don't know if there's anything else that you want me to elaborate a little bit more on. I think there was a bit of an intro and a couple of topics that we can discuss and talk a little bit more about. Maybe I can just make a comment if there are any questions or any interest in that. I think the nature of this thing that we call the economy has changed, and the lockdown simply accelerated many of these things. The typical examples, and we all know about this, is what we're doing at the moment: technology. Another thing is I'm sitting at home at the moment, working from home. It's becoming the norm now. And also important is that the structure of economies is that the economy, the real value add, is taking place in the services industry, in the technologically driven part of the industry. And don't think that industries like, for example, agriculture is necessarily left behind. Agriculture is one of those industries that is also becoming part of this technologically driven part of the economy. Like, for example, drones. People use drones in agriculture, or very special kinds of farming techniques that are very much technologically driven. Many instances, farmers don't even go to the farms. They use a drone to go and visit stuff. And genetic engineering is a good example. So don't think agriculture or manufacturing or whatever is staying behind. Many of these sectors are actually part of this tertiary sector, which is pretty much, well, it's information driven and it's technologically driven, generally speaking. South Africa is not prepared for that. South Africa is not prepared for this new world because of a lack of skills and because government simply not seeing what is happening. Government think, and I think land is a good example, is that land is the answer to agriculture. Land is not the answer to agriculture, and the land is not even important in agriculture. What is important is skills in agriculture also, because the real value add happens in labs, and it happens in universities, and it happens quite often not even on the farm. Somebody's sitting somewhere and managing a drone flying over the farm. But that's the emotional thing. So those are the sort of subtle changes that's been happening for many decades, and suddenly that's been forced upon the world economy. And today we find the world economy completely different from the past. And I think there's mostly good news. But it's important for us as a country to understand that it's skills development that is the key to South Africa's future, economic future. And it's not necessarily education. There's a difference between the two. Quite often we think that if you have a piece of paper, then you are ready to enter the economy. Not necessarily. We have a piece of paper called matric, that certainly does not qualify an individual to participate in this new thing that we call the modern economy. Anyway, there are some comments there. And if there's any, and I'm also quite excited about this new technology called the blockchain. But there, anyway, if any questions on
Yeah.
that, I will be more than happy to take.
Dawie, thank you very much. Certainly some hard effects that you actually brought out there, but I just have to ask you a few questions. Some of them have come in the chat, but let me ask you a few specific questions. Is the violence gone, in your opinion? Can we sit back and say, well, it was just anger over something we don't understand, but now it's okay to plan, let's open up the shops, and is the violence gone?
No, it's not gone. The violence is not gone simply because much of the reasons behind the violence is still there. And I'm not going to say it's mostly politics or mostly socioeconomic. I think it's a mixture of the two. But as a job as an economist, I can tell you that poverty will still be there. I can tell you unemployment will go up in the short term. I can tell you there will be even more poverty over the next couple of years in South Africa. So that part of the equation is going to remain. The political part, that's a different question. That really depends on our political leadership, whether they will be able to contain that, whether they begin. But as an economist, much of what we've seen recently has to do with socioeconomic conditions, and that is still there, and in many instances is going to get worse.
In your opinion, what was the damage? Just estimation from job loss, life, or obviously any loss of life is terrible.
Yeah, you're forcing to put a number to this. And the number to this, okay, let me give you a couple of numbers.
Yeah.
The damage, and there are many various estimates to this, but the damage to property, the damage to infrastructure, the damage to stock, is running in the tens of billions. So we're talking about tens of billions. 20 billion rand, I guess, is a good estimate. 30 billion rand is a good estimate, somewhere there. Much of that, of course, will be insured. Much of that is insured by SASRA. SASRA is our, let's call it our political short-term insurer in South Africa.
Yeah.
Their total assets is approximately 10 billion, just less than 10 billion rand. So I think much of those damages will be covered by SASRA if you are covered, if you have a policy. Much of that will be covered. And they are, the way I understand it, they are reinsured abroad. So in a perverse kind of way, it can actually lead to inflow of money into South Africa. So SASRA will cover much of that. The other insurance companies, I'm afraid they're not going to cover all of that. And there will be individuals and businesses that will simply have to take the knock on their bottom line. In many instances, many businesses will close down and they will never ever reopen again. This will also lead to a substantial, significant increase in unemployment already, and I've mentioned poverty and stuff like that as well. But that is not the real damage. The real damage is actually what's going to happen now, what's going to happen in future. And you have to remember that an economy is like a tree. And if you cut the tree off, you can look at the rings of a tree, and you can add this. Clever people tell me you can look at the rings of a tree, and they can tell you that 200 years ago this tree experienced a severe drought because we can see it in the rings of the tree.
Yeah.
And that's the way an economy functions as well. If you go through a bad patch like now, that will affect the economy, and it will be with us forever. And it's impossible to go back to yesterday, and it's impossible to fix the mistakes of yesterday. You can only fix the mistakes of today and the mistakes of tomorrow, or possible mistakes. You cannot go back to yesterday. And that damage to the economy is simply incalculable.
So now let me put you in a very difficult position. A president for the next 2 minutes. What should Ramaphosa do now? As the best possible response that will save people's lives, protect property damage, but also save the economy. What should he do?
Yeah, I think the president is in a it's not an easy job, very easy. I think the first thing that needs to happen, we got here because of politics, and we're going to get out of here by fixing politics. The Minister of Police did a horrible job. Let's be honest about this. The Minister of Defense did a horrible job. I mean, the Minister of Defense is contradicting the president. I mean, there's an example of what is happening. It's happening now. The president said this is political. Basically, the president said much of this is politically motivated. And the Minister of Defense said, no, it's not. It's just normal thuggery. So what is it? So that's an example. So we don't have a government. We've got the biggest political opponent to the ANC, the opposition to the ANC is the ANC. We need to fix that first. So if I was the president, I will reshuffle the cabinet. I will make it significantly smaller than what it is now. I will close down many departments. Department of Sport, I can't think what you do with the Department of Sport. Think a little bit about what the job of the Minister of Sport is. What does he do? Apart from going to international boxing events, for instance, what does he do? Close that department. Close the Department of Small Business Development. Close the silly Department of Women and whatever. Close. We don't need that sort of stuff. But we need, you can put all those departments into one department, get rid of most of your deputy presidents, and appoint ministers that can do the job, and do not appoint ministers that you appoint because of doing somebody a political favor somewhere. So that must be step number one. Get the right and competent people in the right job. That without a doubt must be the first step. Once we've done that, we can start to really fixing the economic issues. Now, the economic issues include things like, for example, labor legislation. We cannot prevent people from working if they are desperate for work, but because of minimum wages, they can't work. That's one example. So do something about labor legislation. Many other examples. I also don't think COSATU can be part of the tripartite alliance. It doesn't make sense to have labor with government in government governing labor. It's a huge contradiction. You must fix this. You must do something about the state-owned enterprises. In many instances, you must simply close them down. In many instances, you have to break them up in pieces, like the example is. So that's another example. You must stop with this nonsense about expropriation. It is theft. People are not going to invest if you're threatening to take their stuff, for example. So there are many of the examples, and I can give you a long list of other things that we need to do. As a fiscal economist, on the fiscal, I specialize in the fiscal accounts. I can tell you all sort of things, how we can change the tax regime, and how we can change fiscal spending and all that. And maybe on fiscal spending, maybe I can just point this one out as well. I did mention that our national departments are horribly run. Education, as far as I'm concerned, is by far the single most important expense item of this government. It is a disaster. It is a huge disaster. The quality of our education is bad and is sometimes the worst in the world. And it's not because of money. We spend more money than most countries in the world. So we need to overall, we have to speak to one another, and we have to understand that if we want to have a future as a country in a modern economy, we have to fix education. And that means primary education is the place to start, not at universities, where it really matters, and with our small children. And we must make sure they get world-class education. And even when we start where you're supposed to start, it's still going to take as many years to get there. So on education, I would propose opening up the schools as soon as possible, extending the school day, including a Saturday school day. Now, I know people are going to say, listen, are you crazy? But that's what they do in countries like, for example, Russia. They go to school on Saturday. They go to many other countries in the world. We have to understand that we have got a huge backlog here. If we want to be a modern economy, those are the sort of sacrifices that we simply have to do and get involved in if we want to get South Africa up and running.
So, Dawie, we are in the middle of a pandemic, all right? COVID-19 vaccination programs are sort of, we are way behind our own deadlines. Then all these unrests, and we don't know what the next day will actually bring in South Africa. And I'm sitting here, I'm a business person. I'm saying to myself, if we could not control this violence, this looting, can we even control terrorism? Does this inspire confidence from your perspective? I mean, I'm sitting as an investor in America, and I'm looking at South Africa as a prime destination.
Yeah.
Are we there yet?
No. In fact, we've lost out. And like I've said earlier, a government is in essence an institution that monopolizes power or violence. Let's be brutal about this. A government must be able to be violent, because that's the essence of a government, is that they use violence if necessary to protect you and me, to make sure that we've got law and order in the country. We don't have a government that monopolized violence in South Africa. We've got a mob that's running amok and they violently amok. And we've got the local authorities violently protecting their own property in their own communities. We don't have a government that monopolizes violence. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not in favor of violence. Please try to see this in a philosophical point, in a philosophical light, is that you must have a capable government of protecting people. Because if you have a capable government of protecting people and their stuff, then people feel safe. We don't have that. And that's the primary function of a government. I'm very sorry. But the damage done to the South African government, in fact, not only even to South Africa, brand South Africa, the damage done to government has been huge. But and let me repeat myself, the ANC government has been humiliated in public, and the incompetence is there for everybody to see.
So now let me ask you this, because the main question that we asked for this webinar is, can we recover? All right. Yes. Can we recover? Really, yeah. Is it too late?
No, of course.
This is election year and there's a lot happening. Can we recover out of this?
Yes, we can recover. We really can recover. We need to fix the politics, like I've said earlier. But there are many other things where we can recover. I did mention, and maybe we should emphasize that a little bit more. There are things working well. Like I've said, the Reserve Bank, like I've said, the Constitutional Court. I mean, we can and should be proud on the Constitutional Court, on the press, and even a public protector before, previously. So there are many institutions still working well in South Africa. Where I mentioned our financial markets are absolutely brilliant. Yeah. I mean, in many instances, we are far more advanced than many rich countries in the world. And that has been our saving grace to a lot. That certainly has been part of the reason why the rand held up quite well. But a collapsing state actually provides many opportunities as well. An obvious opportunity, and this is not a good opportunity, but it's an opportunity that was created by a collapsing state, and that's insecurity. There are 3 times as many security personnel in South Africa than policemen. So in a way, we've privatized police in South Africa in a way. But there are many other examples, and I think the combination of a collapsing state with the current lockdown and the past year's lockdown actually opens up many opportunities. And these opportunities are in things like, for example, in education. There are amazing opportunities in education coupled with technology. And you don't have to be somewhere, you can be anywhere, and you can really make money out of education. And we see that all over the place. Health services. Again, the state is collapsing on health services, but that opens an opportunity for the private sector on health services. Many other functions. Electricity is an excellent example. So that's an infrastructural opportunity for the private sector to get involved in electricity at various levels, at generation, at transmission, at distribution. And the government realizes that because they allow the private sector to generate 100 megawatts now. And by the way, they only took this decision after they really come to the end of the road, because they only did the right thing after they've explored all the alternatives. So there's another opportunity. Yeah. But of course, all these sort of things goes with significant risk. And I know, because I speak to international investors all the time, they say, listen, I'm happy to invest here. Your yields are absolutely amazing and very attractive, but the risks is very high. I want to be compensated for my risk. Yeah. So as long as the risks are there, international investors and local investors are going to demand a very high return. Yes. And so there are many opportunities, without a doubt, in South Africa. We're never going to get back, and we shouldn't be getting back, because getting back means that we're going to go back to where agriculture and mining is 60-70% of the economy. We don't want to go back to that. We want to go forward to something new, and something new is a modern, sophisticated, technologically driven economy.
Yes.
So that's what we should be aiming to, not to be back. We don't want to go back. We want to go forward. And there are opportunities in a weird kind of way.
Dawie, I'm 5 minutes over, but I have to ask you one more question. And by the way, a lot of people are saluting that view on education. So well done on that suggestion. But let me just quickly ask you, because a lot of our audience is procurement, supply chain. They are asking themselves is if vital infrastructure is cut down, say in KZN or somewhere else in the country, and we can't get fuel, can't get food distributions, you know, from a supply perspective, what should I do to ensure business continuity? What do you think? Because we have seen it. I mean, at one point, a loaf of bread was going for 40 Rand in KZN, and that is not sustainable. So from a supply perspective, how do I prepare for eventualities like this?
Okay. Mediasi, I just want to say in the chat box, I've put my email address. So if anybody wants to see, send me an email. If you want to be part of my newsletter, I'll put you on my newsletter. It's for free. Just send me an email and make sure you get that. All right. So there it is. It's in the chat box. All right. I just want, what can we do to make sure that we still get the stuff that we need?
Yeah.
And the answer is very, very easy. And unfortunately, this morning, is it the Competition Commission? I think it's Competition Commission warning people that if you want to capitalize on the hardship of people now and increase the prices of bread or whatever above a certain level, then we're going to punish you. We're going to, come down on you like a ton of bricks. That's an excellent example of the wrong approach. If the price of bread is 40 Rand a loaf, that's the best possible way of making sure you are going to get bread. Because if there's a shortage of anything, the prices of that thing must reflect that shortage. And that will suck in a lot of providers and suppliers of that specific product simply because they can make money out of that. So there's an example. Let me give you a simple example. It is clean water is more accessible in Africa than clean water. Coca-Cola is more accessible than clean water in Africa. Why is that? Because the private sector provides Coca-Cola and governments provide free water. Something that is free has no value and nobody wants to provide that. Something that is expensive or has got a price to that has got a value and people do want to provide that. So the answer to procurement is allow the market to do what the market is supposed to do. And that means that supply and demand forces will fix prices wherever that may be. And you have to allow the market to do that because that's the quickest way to make sure that if there are any shortages of anything, that shortage will be filled very quickly.
Dawie, I can spend the whole day with you here, but thank you very much. Some strong views. We really appreciate your time in doing this. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll keep you posted for our next Flash Talk as breaking news happens in South Africa, and we'll have these hard talks. But Dawie, what a time you had, and thank you very much. I'm glad you dropped your email as well, then people can also follow you and get in contact with you. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. It's a pleasure to be with you. See you again next time.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.